we have, once again, Odysseus giving himself a very elaborate fake backstory to tell to someone. And it is same but different.
Yeah, same but different. That's Odysseus' way with storytelling.
Yeah, it's like kind of the same thing, but it's a little bit different. And it takes up the majority of the middle of this book.
Yep. Well, hello, and welcome to Winnow, a couple's close reading of the Iliad and the Odyssey. I'm Owen Gemmer.
I'm Isabella Gemmer. We are married, and we love to talk about books together.
In this podcast, we are working our way book by book through the entirety of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. This particular episode will cover the Odyssey Book 14.
Mine calls this book A Loyal Slave, which is very like Tolstoy-esque. We've got like this noble servant kind of situation.
Yeah. So I'm going to give a 60-second summary of the book, and then Bella will ask an opening question, and we'll go from there.
3, 2, 1.
Odysseus leaves Athena and travels up towards society and finds Eumaeus, the swineherd. He approaches, the dogs chase after him, but Eumaeus shoos them away and welcomes him very, very generously. He's very kind to Odysseus, who again is disguised as an old man and is just very like welcoming, makes some food for him, and they sit down and they talk. The conversation begins with Eumaeus kind of lamenting about the state of their city where, you know, Odysseus is gone and the suitors are taking over and eating all the pigs and things like that, and everything is bad. Odysseus then sort of gives, again, his backstory, but it is made up. It is a different fake backstory than he gave to Athena in the last book, but it is still a fake backstory. And then Eumaeus continues to like talk through what's going on, and the other swineherds come and they kind of have a feast, and then they go to sleep.
You had a few seconds to spare.
Yeah, but this one's pretty simple and straightforward. I think the details are interesting that we'll talk through, but the actual kind of plot events, there's really not that many discrete events that happen.
Yeah. I think a summary ends up being a little longer when there's like a setting shift or something.
Yeah.
'Cause remember in the last book how it starts with Odysseus, it goes to Poseidon and Zeus, and then it goes back to Odysseus.
Right.
And like, so because of that like shift, it makes it feel like like a lot happens.
This one really is just one conversation.
Yeah.
That then it goes back and forth, but
yeah. Yes. If you are a fan of Stephen King's Dark Tower series, you might say that they hold palaver in this book, which I like. Like whenever you have two characters or two groups of characters who are like one of them's on a journey and they cross paths and they like exchange information about who they are and what they're doing.
Yeah.
They hold palaver, you know, that kind of thing. Okay, so my opening question is straightforward. Basically, we've got this new character, Eumaeus the swineherd, also called the loyal servant, or he's a slave. I just want to talk about who is this character, who is this guy, and also what does he potentially represent in the narrative?
Yeah, I think my kind of just gut emotional reaction when reading this is like really positive. Like it is so refreshing almost for me in reading Eumaeus's character, because kind of Odysseus has been like dancing around a lot of people with suspicion, and I think for good reason. Like he's been kind of betrayed and lied to and kind of manipulated a lot. And so he's, you know, wary of that. But I think just by Eumaeus's demeanor and language, he is so like genuine. And it's like such a breath of fresh air in this story that is so much about kind of, you know, twisting and turning. And Eumaeus is so steady. And I found it, just like really comforting to read, because it's very pastoral in that way. Like it's very kind of beautiful descriptions and very just kind of like melodic language and just kindness and peace and tranquility, despite the fact that there's a lot of bad things going on. And I think Eumaeus does a great job of balancing honesty. He's like honest about what is happening, and he's a little bit sad and somewhat there are hints of hopelessness, but there's still enough hope there that like, I just find it so comforting to sort of to read his approach to everything.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a question, and then I have comments with it, because as Odysseus is like leaving the bay and going to look for Eumaeus, and he approaches where all the pigs are and all this stuff, the description of the approach reminds me of two things, because there are swine everywhere. It like describes the way that the pigs are, like the sows are kept like a certain amount per pen, and there's like 12 pens, and they're like lined up nicely and neatly, and then the boars are kept in a different place. And then it's also described that there are like 4 semi-wild dogs that like guard the place. And as he approaches, it kind of almost feels like he's approaching a palace of sorts, like 2 different palaces. It feels like a mixture of approaching Circe with the pigs, the boars, and the dogs. And it feels like approaching the entrance of the Phaeacian palace. Because if you remember, like the description of in approaching the palace, there's like a silver and a gold statues of dogs like outside the front. And so, that could be just like a really common thing, that there are just like guard dogs. Like that's like just maybe a common thing. But it feels like he is approaching a palace like he has before, but yet it is different. And part of me, so my question kind of with that is like, as he's approaching the palace, if you were reading this for the first time, because we're not, we know Eumaeus is like, we know as we read it, we know he's going to be this very like grounded, down to earth guy. But as he approaches the palace, like, is there a sense of, is this guy gonna be weird? Like, is he gonna be a little mean? Is he gonna be really gruff? Like, yeah. What's the feeling as Odysseus approaches the palace?
Right. Yeah. Because again, my opening question for book 13, right, was about Odysseus's reaction when landing on Ithaca and not recognizing it at first, where he was like, are these people hospitable to strangers, or are they savages, and things like that. So that question, even though he knows it's Ithaca now, that seems still on his mind of like, yeah, I've been told Eumaeus is still loyal to me, but like, yeah, there is this sort of still dubiousness. And I think when you were talking about the dogs, I think that actually helps me realize the contrast that is set up, because the dogs do their job. They're guard dogs. And so they sort of like are barking at a stranger, not knowing who he is. And so they kind of represent the sort of wildness, savagery. But then Eumaeus like shoos the dogs away and welcomes Odysseus in. And so Eumaeus is set up in contrast to that of hospitable to strangers. Like those are the 2 things Odysseus is looking for. Are they savage, or are they hospitable to strangers? And we get the dogs, but then they're immediately sort of like dealt with by the person who is very hospitable to strangers. And Eumaeus ends up kind of embodying everything that both Odysseus, but the culture in general, wants from sort of hosts and guests.
Yeah, and there's something about the way Eumaeus is like how he keeps the boars and the sows, and how he's easily able to shoe, the dogs. There's something about him that feels like he's very much master of the wild things. That he is able to like assert himself over nature or like these wild things, but not in an overbearing way.
Yeah, and I think, if we're drawing the parallel back to Phaeacia or even to Circe, right? Like Circe was not welcoming to strangers. She turned strangers into pigs. The Alcinous and Arete in Phaeacia were welcoming to strangers. But I think, at least from my perspective, and I don't know how standard this was, like it obviously feels more expected for Alcinous and Arete, who are powerful and wealthy, to be generous. And so like when they are very generous to Odysseus, it doesn't feel that meaningful or that impressive, because it's like, well, yeah, like you have unlimited food and drink and these kinds of things. Of course, you're going to be really generous. But when Eumaeus offers the same level of generosity, I think it feels even more genuine. There's a line pretty early on in his sort of Eumaeus's opening speech to Odysseus. It was never our guise to slight the poor or augment human despise. For Jove unfold our hospitable door. 'Tis Jove that sends the stranger and the poor. Little, alas, is all the good I can. A man oppressed, dependent, yet a man. Accept such treatment as a swain affords, slave to the insolence of youthful lords. So he just kind of is very honest with Odysseus. Like, I don't have much. Like, I'm lowly, and now there's all these suitors here who are sort of taking even more from me, and yet the little I have I will share with you. Like, it feels almost biblical in that sense.
Yeah.
Of sort of giving even from your poverty. I just find like really, really beautiful.
Yeah, there is something that feels biblical about it. Like how Eumaeus is like, he's not like a shepherd. He's like a swineherd, which is different. But it's like kind of the same.
That pastoral imagery, yeah.
Yeah, it has like a very similar vibe to it.
Yeah.
And he lives, because of the nature of his job, taking care of the pigs, it even mentions at the end how he like sleeps with the pigs, right? Like like that imagery, like sleeping with the pigs is very like biblical. And how he's like not necessarily a full member of what I imagine is like the community of Ithaca. He's not he's not in the main community. He's not one of the guys in the city square.
Yeah.
But and he's like attached to the palace, yet he's far from it because of the nature of the job and stuff. So he just like occupies a very specific part of society where he is like the keeper of the keys or something in some weird way. He's the keeper of the boars, the food, the really good food, of which the suitors, want a lot of.
Yeah. Yeah. And even when Eumaeus is sort of giving some backstory about the status of Ithaca as a whole, he mentions, we also have these flocks of cattle and the flocks of goats. And he actually explicitly mentions that the goat herd and the cattle herd are foreigners. Like, there are foreigners taking care of this and they're doing their job. But I think that also sets him up in contrast of like, they're foreigners. This job is often a job for outsiders. I'm doing this job, but I'm also still trying to be an insider. Like, I'm loyal to the palace and these kinds of things, despite, like not actually having the sort of social status. I still like am trying to be a local and trying to embrace this as my home and Odysseus as my master, because he's very sad that Odysseus is gone and mournful and worried that he's either dead or, never going to come back again because he's exiled or something.
Yeah, yeah. Because he is the supplier of the food for the suitors, the meat for the suitors. Like, he of all people knows like their gluttony, right? In a sense. He talks about how each night and day they butcher sheep, not one, but dozens of them. And so like which gets to like, out of all the people Odysseus could encounter first, well, he encounters Athena first technically, but she's not part of the, out of all the people who exist on Ithaca, he could encounter first, like it feels like this is the right choice of the first person that he would have an encounter with. Mostly because it seems like he's in a unique societal position to know exactly what's going on in the palace without being a member of it.
Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't have his hands dirty in the politics. He has his hands like dirty in the pigs, but like that's it. It's grounded in that way. Yeah. Let's talk about Eumaeus's name, because this is also interesting. This will be our little Greek time segment.
Yes, it's Greek time.
Because different characters, sometimes their names, come from words that mean interesting things. So Eumaeus, the first part, EU, is a very common Greek prefix meaning good. Eulogy, we have lots of things in English that start with U. But there is two possibilities that the rest of the name can mean, both of which are interesting. And it seems like from the brief research I did, there's not consensus as to what was intended or what is normal, because it seems like this character is kind of the only person named Eumaeus, and everything else is derivative of this character. So that leads me to believe that Homer might have made this name up for this character rather than it being a pre-existing name that was like in the society that he chose for the character.
Yeah.
So option number one, there is a verb myomai, which then could be shortened or changed to Eumaeus. And that verb means to seek or to search, that kind of thing. And so if we combine those together, it's like well seeking, well searching, good searcher kinds of things.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Like, how would that fit? When I first read that to you, you were like, "Ooh, that's interesting."
Yeah, because so obviously he's not physically searching for anything because he's a guy very rooted in one place. But I did think it was interesting how out of all the people so far, when Odysseus gives a fake backstory about himself, Eumaeus is the first to be like, I don't know about that. Mm-hmm. Like, he's skeptical, which leads me to believe that like he has a lot of hope that Odysseus will, he has a little hope. He does kind of have like a whole speech where he's like, Odysseus is probably dead. He's either been eaten by the birds or he's been eaten by the fish. But he's got a little bit of hope in there. And yeah, I was thinking about that as like the element of like searching, like the searching for hope.
Yeah. The other possibility seems to be a little bit more of a stretch, but again, I think if we believe that this name was made up specifically for this character, I think it makes more sense. So there is a noun. So Maya was a verb. There is a noun that is mu alpha iota alpha MAIA that means foster mother or nurse or sort of any. There's a variety of different like midwifey kind of roles that can be. And then you could then say MAIOS, myos would be the masculine form of that. Mm-hmm. In the Greek dictionary that we have, the masculine form doesn't sort of appear as its own entry saying foster father or things like that, just because I assume that wasn't a frequent role in terms of like wet nurses and things like that. You didn't really have, male servants taking care of children. Yeah. But if we're going with Homer intentionally sort of crafting this name, taking the masculine form of this usually feminine noun for foster mother and making it like the good foster father, I think is super fascinating as a potential for Eumaeus's name here. Because again, like he's obviously kind of on a literal level, the foster father of the swine. He cares for them, but through his loyalty, he proves that like he has cared for the spirit of Ithaca, even if he hasn't like again had the political power. And he also like again in his kind of State of the Union address that he gives to Odysseus, he speaks very highly of Telemachus, that he's like, Telemachus has grown into a man and I'm proud of him and he has been kind to me and he clearly cares about Telemachus as well. Mm-hmm. And so there's that sort of it's not really clear that Telemachus knows Eumaeus that well or is like friends with him in that sense. Yeah. But there is still like a fondness there where Odysseus meets Eumaeus and it becomes very clear that Eumaeus has sort of like held firm to the things that Odysseus would have wanted people to hold firm to in Ithaca. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A sort of foster father of the land.
Yes.
Is what I would say. But because Ithaca isn't a place where crops easily grow, the thing that they prosper in their land are the things that feed on the grass and stuff. So like the goats and the swine and the sheep. And so in caring for those things deeply, he is a sort of foster father of Ithaca.
Yeah. And this will also, this isn't spoiling too much, right? When I think we know actually at this point, Odysseus's dad is still alive, but has kind of like retired to the countryside. Yeah, and
he's really old and
has a bunch of orchards though. So his Odysseus's actual father is also this very kind of like agricultural archetype now of caring for the land. And when Odysseus eventually meets with his father at the very end, that scene takes place like in an orchard. Mm-hmm. And so there is, this very like groundedness of the father figure, both the foster father of Eumaeus caring for the swine and his actual father caring for these apple trees or whatever they are.
Yeah. Which transitions nicely to, again, why meet this guy first? Mm-hmm. Let's say, hypothetically, Odysseus was to well, Athena didn't tell him to go to his father, his biological father first. But it's like, what if he had? Because his dad isn't like in the palace and isn't in the middle of things. So it would have been sort of safe in a sense for him to go to his father first.
Yeah.
But he doesn't. He actually doesn't go to see his father until much, much later.
Yeah.
One of the last people he goes to. Yeah. And so it just again emphasizes this strange importance, I think, about going to the servant, going to Eumaeus, going to someone who is like low on the totem pole is way more valuable. The paradoxical nature of how Odysseus re-enters, right? Like instead of going to the more high ranking patriarch figure, he goes to the lowest ranking, right?
But still quasi patriarch figure. Yeah.
Yeah. But still, he's obviously in charge of all the livestock guys.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too that's really wonderful about Eumaeus, again, in terms of his generosity and things like this, he complains about how much the suitors are asking of them in terms of taking their pigs. Like he's very clear, like the number, like our herd has shrunk massively because like we can't keep up, the breeding can't keep up with how much they are taking.
Yeah.
And yet when Odysseus arrives, he kills a pig for them to cook and eat together. There's actually like a semi-gruesome detailed description of Eumaeus, like killing and butchering one of the pigs. But again, like there is this very clear, like, our flock is shrinking, and yet I will still take from it to feed you, this stranger. Yeah.
And the way that it also very much reminds me of, I believe it's like King Henry V, whichever one is the one where the king dresses up like one of his men in the army, and he like by night he goes around the campfires and asks them.
That's King Henry IV, Part 1.
Okay. Yeah, where he's like, so what do you guys think about the king?
Yeah.
It's like that same thing.
Yeah.
Because he literally says that to Eumaeus. He's like, so what do you think about Odysseus? Like, what's up with that? And he gets so that whole, it's very much like, who do you go to get the truth, right?
Yeah.
Like the real knowledge.
Yeah. So yeah, again, in this conversation, Eumaeus kind of gives the report, answers the questions. He kind of passes all the tests, both in terms of his honesty and his care about Odysseus. Again, there is hints of worry and maybe hopelessness. Like he's borderline giving up hope a little bit, but still searching for it, as we mentioned. But then Odysseus, he in the sort of customs of this sort of guest friendship, he asks, like, who are you? Where have you come from? And Odysseus spins this 4 or 5 page long backstory that's completely made up, but also still kind of true in some ways, but also is very different from the one he just gave to Athena in the last book.
The backstory is, he says like that he was a guy from Crete, and his father was like lord of the land, but his mother was not one of the wives. His mother was a slave. And so, but yet his father treated him kindly.
The bastard.
Yeah, he was like kind of like the runt of the litter child, but yet he was still treated equal to his brothers. But then his father died, and it's like classic, like when you think about it. And then, so his brothers, who thought of themselves as more biologically, worthy of the inheritance, pushed him to the side and gave him a very small bit of land. But he was still strong enough to win himself a wife with a good dowry. And then he was kind of, everything that he does in this fake backstory, it sounds like he was forced to do. He's like, they made me. The people wanted, my translation says, the people wanted me to sail to Troy with Idomeneus. We had no choice. Their will was strong, constraining us. So he's always, in the backstories, he's also always fighting in the Trojan War, just not as himself, which is interesting.
I found it interesting that like throughout this description, he paints himself almost kind of Nestor-like. And I think it makes sense because his appearance is older.
Really old,
so he's very clear, like, I had many great military exploits even before Troy. Like I was already a sort of well-established military person before the fighting at Troy even started. And so when then I went to Troy, you know, I was one of the sort of, you know, veterans already, not one of the kind of newbies.
Yeah.
Which is how Nestor portrays himself all the time in the Iliad of like, oh, back in my day, I fought, you know, XYZ before you guys were even born. And Odysseus leans into that archetype a little, right? Because he recognizes like, there's no way I can pass myself off as like one of these young bucks who just fought in the Trojan War. He has to embrace the age of his appearance in terms of his backstory.
Yeah. And so in his backstory, fighting in the Trojan War is actually kind of very short, because then after that he goes on this huge journey to Egypt, but all of his men are taken and captured, but he is able to sort of supplicate himself to the Egyptian king guy, and
right, which again is similar to what actually happened to him leaving Troy in terms of like misadventures leading to all of his crew dying, but himself surviving and being able to ingratiate himself with powerful people. But the details are different. The other important details at the end is that like while he was there, he knows about Odysseus's fate. And so kind of it seems like part of the goal of this backstory is to tell Eumaeus that I have heard very concretely that Odysseus is alive and will be returning soon. And he crafts this story, it seems almost intentionally, to be able to sort of like plant that seed with Eumaeus.
Yeah, he a couple times is like, no, I'm telling you, Odysseus is coming.
Yeah.
Within this moon cycle, he will be here. And Eumaeus is, he's like, oh, that would be nice, is kind of what he says. But he's not quick to jump on Odysseus in Disguise's words as they are like 100% truth. Which he even calls out Odysseus, why do you stoop to tell those silly lies? I know about my master's homecoming. Yeah, like what's up with Eumaeus's skepticism?
Because I think it's easy to interpret that as like, well, maybe he's not as loyal as he thought. And like, is Odysseus probing to test his loyalty? And like, is this kind of him failing the test a little bit? But I think the more generous interpretation is it actually proves his thoughtfulness and his rationality.
Yeah,
that
that's
like
what I was thinking.
Eumaeus isn't sort of easily swayed, and he is thoughtful and sort of critical and a little bit dubious in a way that I think Odysseus will end up liking and respecting. Is like, oh yeah, this guy isn't just sort of like along for the ride and just going with the whims of whatever is coming his way. He's there like trying to be steady and needs to be persuaded, and that proves his thoughtfulness and rationality.
Yeah. Eumaeus says that like other guys who are more well-dressed, they go to the palace and they're taken in as guests at the palace, and they tell, you know, sweet lies to Penelope about, you know, potentially where Odysseus is and what he's doing. And he's very like, we don't believe any of this. Yeah. Like,
I'll believe it when I see it, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, it's like a different approach to like, instead of like the someone who has like always like holding out faith and these kinds of things. It's like kind of the opposite. He's a little bit like, when it happens, it happens. But until then, like I gotta keep up with the sheeps and the swines.
Yeah. The rest of the swineherds that work under Eumaeus, because there's a lot of swine, so it's not just him. He's got a couple people under him. They sort of return from their duties, and then they all again eat together and go to sleep. And there's this big hullabaloo about how Odysseus is going to stay warm because he doesn't have lots of clothes. And Eumaeus is like, here, take my coat.
Yeah. Odysseus tells a story about how when he was at Troy, Odysseus in the story was able to, through a little bit of manipulation, able to get him a cloak to keep him warm. Yeah. And then they, in hearing that story, go, well, if Odysseus got you a cloak back in the war, then we'll give you a cloak here. They're like, we understand. You're saying you're going to be cold tonight, aren't you? Yeah. Well, we'll give you a coat. So it's like so weird how he's able to like meta use himself in stories. Yeah. I think it's great. The last thing we should talk about before we wrap up is that we have another really rare instance in this book of the narration using second person to refer to Eumaeus. So multiple times in this book, it reads, "You answered him, swineherd Eumaeus," and then the words and the quote, what he says. In the Iliad, this usually only happened with Menelaus. Mm-hmm. The narration used second person you to talk about Menelaus. And this is, I believe, the first time we get this in the Odyssey. Yeah. And potentially the only time. And yeah, it feels like it's used. Obviously, it indicates the importance of Eumaeus' character. Mm-hmm. That this isn't just another guy in the chain of all the meetings that have been happening, all the people Odysseus has met. This is like someone special you should pay attention to. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's like a reverence to it that like...
Yeah.
He is set apart not just because it's unique, but like because the very language itself of like addressing a poem to someone, like an apostrophe is the technical English class term. Like feels reverent. Is it worth trying to speculate if there's some similarity between Eumaeus and Menelaus, that they are the only two characters that Homer gives this treatment to?
Maybe not a similarity between the characters, but I remember feeling when reading the Iliad that the narrator, in using you, addressing Menelaus directly, was kind of like, felt very like personal to Menelaus. It felt very much like the narrator was in on the plot with Menelaus. Mm-hmm. Almost like a break the fourth wall or a look at the camera moment. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if it's similar with Eumaeus here, that it just speaks to potentially how Eumaeus is very aware, very like conscious of everything that's going on.
Yeah. Well, I wonder too, to me, it almost feels like it indicates these characters as the kind of main character, not in terms of like screen time or even importance, but in terms of being the like straight man, where Menelaus in the Iliad is sort of the most normal, where like Achilles has his thing going on, Agamemnon has his thing going on, Diomedes has his thing going on, Odysseus has his thing going on, mm-hmm. Hector has his thing going on, but Menelaus is just kind of a great warrior, and that's kind of...
He's kind of just like painted as the regular guy.
Right.
Or...
around which everybody else's extremities and oddities mm-hmm. are sort of contrasted.
Everyone else around him is larger than life and heroic and mythic. Mm-hmm. And he's just like, you guy.
Yeah.
You guy who, like, very, like, you, the guy who knows what's going on. Like, self-aware, they're almost in a story, and they, like, cheat to the camera a little bit.
Yeah. Which in the Iliad is somewhat ironic, because in many ways, Menelaus is the one who kind of started the war, because it was his wife, Helen, who was taken, kidnapped, seduced, whatever you believe it. And that kind of sets off the whole war in the first mm-hmm. place. And so he's both the kind of most normal, but also the whole driver of the plot in a way. So if we're thinking about Eumaeus, he also then represents the sort of straight man kind of normal steadiness around which everybody else's, like extremities or absurdities are compared. Mm.
Yeah, he is a through line in terms of the overarching plot. He feels like he's connected to all of the characters.
Penelope and Telemachus, and now Odysseus.
Yeah, because he knew Odysseus before he left. Now he's like, he knows him obviously now. Well, doesn't know he knows him, but but he's like connected to the suitors and connected to the nobility without being a part of either. Almost like the reader of the story. He's kind mm-hmm. of aware of all the different facets of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's not aware that Odysseus is sitting right before him yet. But he's very aware of all the potential pitfalls around them.
Yeah.
Like he knows the suitors are lying in wait for Telemachus' return.
Yeah.
These kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't actually remember if it's in the next book or if it takes a bit for Odysseus to reveal himself, but I do remember the reveal being very good. Yeah, I just don't remember how soon
when
it
happens.
is.
But yeah, it will be very good when it happens. But we'll get there. Probably not in the next book, but soon.
Yeah. Well, in the next book, if you would like to listen along, I have an audiobook recording of Samuel Butler's translation of Book 15, if you would like to listen, or you can read in any other translation, or just tune in and we'll summarize and we'll talk about it next week.
Yep. And we also have a mini Patreon-only podcast called Chonkers. You can check that out if you want to hear us talk about all the other things that we like to read when we're not reading the Odyssey.
Which these days for me is Brandon Sanderson and for Bella is Stephen King.
Yes.
There's often more variety, but we're both in deep ruts at this point.
Yes. What can I say? But until then,
happy reading.
Happy reading.